This is a real flyer from 1837. It's passed out at a church to a bunch of church folks in the North. Outrage! An abolitionist of the most revolting character is among you, exciting the feelings of the North against the South. A seditious lecture is to be delivered this evening. Let's gather up people and let's go attend it and unite in putting down and silencing by peaceable means this tool of evil and fanaticism. An abolitionist is among you. I'm an abolitionist. I am not a pro-lifer. What I basically want to do is I want to take us beyond pro-life, and I may say something offensive. I may say something that you agree with or disagree with, but just come let us reason together. Because when this flyer was produced and peddled and sent around in a culture, it was produced by people who were, in large part, anti-slavery. At the time, from the founding of the nation to the rise of abolitionists in the 1830s, there were people always saying slavery should be abolished, but it should be done so gradually. We can't abolish slavery overnight. We have to do it piece by piece. I mean, if we abolished it overnight, we'd have all these black people running around. And what would we do with them? It would destroy the economy. They would sleep with our daughters. These were common things said by people, and they parallel some of the things that John had on his slides. And so, in the 1830s, a group of folks arose and they started saying, listen, slavery is sin. It's man-stealing. It's a capital crime. By saying capital crime, they're saying it's punishable. Death. Now, how were these people treated when they arose on the scene? They were called fanatics, radicals, cultists. They were rejected. They were run out of towns. They were tarred and feathered. They were locked up as seditious tyrants. They were brought before the Supreme Court on charges of treason. And this was in a country where you had half of the country that apparently was against slavery and half that was for it. So it's a very convoluted historical situation that we could get very, very nerdy about. But what we need to understand is that these abolitionists that came on the scene had one chief argument. It was that slavery was a sin before God, and that the slave was a man and a brother made in the image of God and my neighbor. And what was being done to him wasn't going to be abolished in 30 years. We weren't going to incrementally get rid of it, because right now, a child is being sold away from his mom. A husband is being removed from his wife right now. And every time that we delay this, we are perpetuating oppression and we are delaying justice. And these abolitionists came on the scene, and who were their principal opponents? Does anyone know? Any historian nerds in the crowd?
Slave owners.
Slave owners, you would think. Who, you're in the North, and an abolitionist stands up and says, we've got to abolish this great evil. Pastors, you need to practice church discipline and remove the slaveholder from our... Who is it that opposed them? Yeah, we got no history. There was a group, the pro-lifers, okay? There were pro-lifers. And this is the shocking thing. And I'm trying to take the opportunity to make this very clear. And to make it clear, I gotta back up here. Colonizationism. Has anyone heard of colonizationism? Colonizationism. Kate, the camera. Well, I've heard of it. There was a group. They were strong. They were powerful. They had people in office. They had money. They took up yearly donations. They had sanctity of life sermons. This is where it began, to where they would support the people who were going to abolish slavery. These were their tenets. We will abolish slavery gradually. We will do so without calling it sin and a capital crime. We will encourage voluntary manumission. Kind of a nerdy word. Voluntary manumission. We will encourage and educate the slave owners to free their slaves. We will pass bills in the House and in the Senate to compensate them for freeing their slaves. But we're not going to call it sin. We're not going to call it murder. And we're going to get rid of it gradually. Today, Dan Fisher is calling himself an abolitionist. An abortion abolitionist. And some of you might say, well, so what's the importance of all this? Like, why do we need to have a raving, seditious, madman, lunatic talk about this sort of thing? It is supremely important because Dan Fisher is running against 4 other pro-life Republican candidates. And those candidates refuse to call abortion murder. They say that we should abolish it. Yes, they agree. But it's going to be gradual. We have to submit to the courts. But in the meantime, our version of voluntary manumission, let's encourage people to choose life. Let's encourage people to, instead of going to the abortion clinic, to go to the crisis pregnancy center. Let's educate, let's teach, let's do this thing. But heaven forbid we call it what it is. Murder. Sin before God. Violation of all the higher laws. So this is deadly serious. Now, so when I say abolition, you guys all think of the slave. The slave was, am I not a man and a brother? And the child, am I not human and a neighbor? But whenever I, say, hey, you know what? I'm an abolitionist, people go, what do you mean? Slavery's been abolished. Is that what y'all pretty much think? Slavery's been abolished. Why are you using this word? Well, if you go back to the very first historian of abolition, Thomas Clarkson. Y'all seen Amazing Grace? You know, the kind of long-haired, wide-eyed, kind of crazy guy that gets in fights with Wilberforce and he's like carrying a baby around. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Thomas Clarkson. He was basically the guy who organized abolitionism in Britain. Well, he defined abolitionism very simply. It's those who seek to undertake the removal of evils. Jump across the pond, William Lloyd Garrison said that an abolitionist is someone who refuses to go with the multitude to do evil or allow any evil to get some good. Contrasting, we are trying to undertake this removal of evil without sort of pragmatically compromising along the way. Whenever William Wilberforce finally sat in Parliament and they passed the Abolition of the Slave Trade Act, everyone's cheering and clapping and his good friend reaches down and says, "Good job, buddy." And William Wilberforce, what did he say? He looked up and said, well, what do we abolish next? After the passage of the 13th Amendment in the United States of America, did the abolitionists just sort of pack up and stop? No, they pursued other evils, namely prostitution and abortion. The very first laws that were written in this country were put forward by the sons and daughters of the abolitionists of slavery. Because as Christians, seeing their neighbors oppressed and destroyed in their midst, in violation of the law of God, they said, we will undertake to remove these evils. So an abolitionist, you have to understand, that word is not connected to slavery. It's connected to an ideology, abolition. And John alluded to it. Its contrast is regulation. Abolition, a no compromise, an uncompromising stance towards evil. Regulation, it's a necessary evil. We can't abolish it overnight. We have to wait on this and that, and so on and so forth. So what we're going to do in the meantime is try to make it a little more rare, a little more safe, so on and so forth. You tracking with me? So another thing that someone might say is that, you can't call yourself an abolitionist and you can't do this sort of thing with the child and the slave and make this comparison or this analogy because slavery and abortion are not the same thing. This is true. Slavery and abortion are not the same thing. In one, you dehumanize a person in order to treat them like property. You pass laws saying, yes, they're a man, sure, they're human, but they're not fully a citizen. They're not fully a person. They don't have the same rights. So you dehumanize them in order to work them to death in the cotton fields or the sugar mines. Dehumanize to destroy them. So it's evil, but it's slavery. They're alive. They're born. They're worked like animals. In America, it was called chattel slavery, treating them like cattle, property. Abortion's different. Abortion is whenever you dehumanize a person in order to justify their destruction. So you can treat them not like a property, but like a parasite. You dehumanize them to destroy them. So, abortion and slavery are different, but they're of the same category. They're both abominations in the eyes of God. They both make us guilty before God. They're both wrong because they're destroying an image bearer of God and a neighbor. So in every age, it seems, since the beginning of time, because of the fall and sin and so forth, there's always been a great evil. So every age has its evils, and the evils change. But in every age where there are evils, where the Spirit of God moves, you have abolitionist. Tracking? The word abolition and abolition is not connected to slavery. It's connected to the removal of evils. Now, where that comes from, I'm just going to zip past this. Do y'all know who William Lloyd Garrison is? Does anyone track with William Lloyd Garrison? Harsh as truth, uncompromising as justice. He was one of the leading abolitionists in the United States of America. And at that time, people were so biblically literate that whenever you quoted the Bible, you didn't have to put a little parenthetical statement like, this is from Isaiah 1:16. So he would get up. This is a picture of him speaking in public. He would get up and he would say that we need to wash ourselves. We need to wash ourselves. We need to make ourselves clean. We need to remove the evil of our deeds before God's eyes. We need to cease to do evil, learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause. And when he would say that, they would talk about slavery as being this uber powerful, wicked, evil, demonstrably false wickedness that was ripping families apart and destroying the fabric of society, culture, and completely contrary to Christianity. Now, when he would quote that, he wouldn't say this is from Isaiah, because everyone knew what he was saying. There were the prophets of protest in the culture standing up to remove the evil of their day. So every age has its evil. Every age has its abolitionist. And this is when Christians come to see the evil that is going on in their midst, and instead of tolerating it and compromising with it, act to do what they ought to do. And as John says, it's actually very darn simple. Cease to do evil, learn to do good. Will there be steps? Will there be struggles? Of course. Will it take time? Of course. But it will never happen unless we call the evil what it is and seek to remove it without compromise. So what's been delaying the abolition of abortion? We've got a country, our nation. I don't know if you guys look at the stats. There are 100 million born-again, Bible-believing Christians who regularly attend church in the United States of America. Okay? They all consider themselves pro-life. We live in a culture inundated with scientific knowledge and technology. We know exactly what a child looks like in the womb. And yet, and we've seen the pictures, John's pictures. So many people have seen those pictures. It's not a mystery. We know it's a human being being murdered, and there's all this. Why is it that 100 million Christians in the state of Oklahoma, let's just Oklahoma, 1.9 million evangelical Christians, what is it, a third of the population? Or 2/3 of the population, sorry. Profess abortion to be wrong and that it needs to be abolished. 85% of the legislature. The people, the legislature voted by the people, profess to be Christians and pro-life. We have a pro-life governor. We have a pro-life lieutenant governor. The mayor of Oklahoma City, who's running for governor, is pro-life. The mayor of Tulsa is pro-life. All the people in power are pro-life. Millions of Christians with knowledge, technology, can't abolish abortion. Why? I'll submit to you, and this is one of the big important parts of our campaign, the reason is because they're pro-lifers and they're not abolitionists. Sounds a bit harsh. Like if you've got pro-life t-shirts, you're like, no, I like the term pro-life. I like it. I've always called myself pro-life. I've got a pro-life keychain. You tell me it's wrong to be pro-life? Well, let's look at the word. Let's go back to the word. I'm going to put it up there really big so it sears into your mind. Have you ever met someone who is personally pro-life? Like Nancy Pelosi? Biden? I mean, they're both pro-life. They're in good, communion with the Catholic Church. They're pro-life personally, but they're not willing to impose their personal beliefs on society. So they're not abolitionists. They believe autonomy, choice, so on and so forth. Have you ever met someone who is personally an abolitionist? Linguistically, does that even make sense? I'm an abolitionist of abortion. I think it's murder and it should be criminalized and illegal. Personally. No, in the very word, you are saying not just what you think and what you would do, but what you think ought to be done in culture. Powerful word. But the churches in America, the political leaders in America, the Republican establishment, the religious authorities, they are all focused on being pro-life. The expression of a moral opinion which actually accepts, get this, the choice. It accepts the choice. There's a choice. Abortion, not abortion. Not abortion, pro-life. Abortion, pro-choice. It's accepting the choice. Dan Fisher has determined to run in our state as a abolitionist and not as a pro-lifer. If you haven't seen this video, we're going to play it. It's about 5 minutes long, and then we will conclude my portion of the talk.
Abortion, the intentional destruction of a preborn human being. In other words, the murder of a baby in their mother's womb. Abortion has been legitimized in our state for the past 44 years. In Oklahoma, we have 4 freestanding abortion mills. These are horrible places where some 20 babies are killed every business day. Think about it. That's over 5,500 babies murdered every year. Tragically, some 250,000 preborn Oklahomans have been deprived of their right to life since the U.S. Supreme Court legitimized the slaughter in 1973. And that's not even counting those killed by various abortifacient drugs and devices. Yet Oklahoma is considered a pro-life state. In fact, many national pro-life organizations consider Oklahoma the most pro-life state in the Union. In a state that murders nearly 6,000 children every year, what does that even mean? I'll tell you what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that we prohibit the killing of preborn babies. What has it meant to be a pro-life politician, legislator, or governor in Oklahoma since 1974? Sadly, it has never meant seeking the abolition of abortion. Now, certainly, pro-life bills are proposed in our state every year, and many of them are passed and signed into law. But all of them are aimed at regulating abortion, not ending it. For example, pro-lifers have passed laws requiring that a mother must wait 72 hours before she has her baby killed, that she has 20 weeks to make the decision to kill her baby. Pro-life legislators have passed laws requiring the abortionist to perform an ultrasound, which the mother may choose to look at or not. Laws requiring that a mother be given a chance to listen to her baby's heartbeat before she consents to stopping it. Laws allowing a baby's body to be ripped into parts, of course, just as long as those parts are not sold. And laws that allow the baby's body to be dismembered as long as the instrument used does not employ the convergence of 2 levers. Even though all of these laws may have reduced the number of preborn babies being murdered, in the end, they really only spell out the requirements for killing a preborn baby. They do not prevent the murder. Every one of these pro-life laws affirms that abortion is legal, treat it as an acceptable choice, and seek to regulate the practice. You know, if you think about it, these laws are basically pro-choice. Not one of them abolishes it. Think about it like this. Imagine abortion as a tree that has been freely growing in our culture for 44 years. Now, let's say that the branches represent the various methods of murder we have devised. Pro-life politicians have taken shears and they've pruned the branches from time to time, but they have never even tried chopping it down. The result is a well-regulated abortion industry that thrives in our state, while politicians, of course, court the pro-life voters by boasting about the number of branches they have trimmed. And tragically, as this abortion tree continues to grow, we get to wear the moniker most pro-life state in the Union. Our state government has historically been dominated by pro-lifers. We've had pro-life governors, pro-life attorney generals, pro-lifers in practically every statewide office. We've had pro-life majorities in both the House and the Senate. But has this extremely pro-life government ever actually attempted to end abortion? No! Of course, to appease the campaign contributors and get votes for re-election, Oklahoma politicians run bills designed to regulate abortion that give the appearance of fighting it, but these laws always keep the practice legal. The one thing most of these pro-life politicians will not do is call for the complete abolition of abortion. I was there. I saw it. And to some degree, I was part of it. So, I am not running for governor of Oklahoma as a pro-lifer. I am not running to regulate abortion. I am running to abolish it. If elected, I will do everything in my power to bring this evil to an end and take executive action to ensure that all Oklahomans are equally protected, including the preborn. I will disregard any unjust rulings or perversions of the U.S. Constitution that claim there is a right to murder preborn human beings in the womb. Now, some are going to ask, well, what about the Supreme Court of the United States? My response is, this is Oklahoma. Ignore them. When the courts are wrong, they should be ignored. We ignored them in the mid-1800s when they said that a black person was just personal property. And we should have. They were wrong. The courts are often wrong. They're wrong now. They are not God. Presently, numerous states across our union are ignoring various federal laws, and Washington, D.C. doesn't seem to be all that concerned about that. Friends, children are being murdered in our state. Is that not cause enough to take a bold stand and say no? We must put down the shears, pick up the axe, and lay it to the root. We must stop regulating murder in our state. It is time to abolish human abortion in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So that's pretty hard-hitting stuff, right? Have y'all seen that? Did y'all miss that? See it on Facebook or anything like that? Okay, it's been out. It's been on YouTube, Facebook, hundreds of thousands of views, that sort of thing. And no one's talking about it. You know who's definitely seen it? Todd Lamb and his staff. Mick Cornett and his staff. Kevin Stitt, Gary Richardson. They've seen it. But you know what they want to do? Keep it numb. Don't let it out there. Because the moment the distinction, the contrast between abolition and pro-life, between abolition and regulation is made, this leaves the Christians in our state the option to regulate abortion as health care or to abolish it as murder. That's why we're putting together these events and talking in various places, because this is a supremely important thing. Now, to conclude, just to draw, you've seen in the videos, you've heard me say it, but just to make it very, very clear and to add one thing to the thing, make the tree a little more complex. We have to understand that at the base, now I'm an evangelical Christian, I've been following Christ, I believe the Word of God, living and active and sharp, and that this moral compass that we have, everyone has it. And we're speaking this stuff, and we're trying to apply those biblical principles in our form of government. But what we have to acknowledge, and as we've seen in the dance, and we've heard before I'm sure all sorts of people get this right, is that ultimately this tree is growing from sin. Now, we didn't go into this in the video. It's not Dan's fault. It was a 5-minute video. We can't go into everything. But if you look at the tree, you've got child sacrifice, and you've got all these different ways to do it. You've got abortifacient drugs and devices that you used very early on. Oops, plan B, caught it. oh man, I didn't catch it. I didn't know if I'd be pregnant while I went into the appointment. Then I set up the appointment. I'm killing my baby at 6 weeks to 11 weeks, kind of the average period in which this happens. You've got chemical abortions, early abortions. You've got surgical abortions. You have different kinds of surgical abortions. You have induced labor abortions. And then you have various other things that have implicit within them abortion. Things that are approved of in our church. In vitro fertilization. That's a hard one. But you know what happens whenever you create 20, 30 children and you implant a few of them? You know what happens to the other ones? If they're not adopted, they die. They're left in cryogenic free chambers. Our culture is full of abortion. All these different ways. And what it is, and I know it's kind of hard-hitting, but we have to move this direction as a church. It's modern-day child sacrifice. It's legalized, industrialized abortion. That's a euphemism for what it is. So what pro-lifers have been doing, as Dan said in his video, is they get these branches, right? Todd Lamb will be able to run and say, I chopped off some branches. I did this law, or I did that. Like, I'm very pro-life. And the pro-lifers in our state need to be like, yeah, but the tree's still growing. You said you're not allowed to use this method to abort babies, and so you made that criminal. And so the abortionists were like, well, people still demand abortion because it's rooted in sin and it's murder, and no one's saying that, so we'll just create a different method. And the pro-life leaders say, well, we'll deal with that method. But they never deal with abortion itself. Now, of course, we can't abolish sin. Christ will abolish sin, right? At the end of all things, whenever everything is made new, we'll have the abolition of sin. It's not our job to abolish sin. It's our job to establish justice and mercy for the fatherless, to remove evils, to correct oppression. And so what we're dealing with is trying to chop down the tree. But if we do not have the foundation and the root right, everything we are doing is actually distracting people from what they ought to be doing and delaying justice. So we got Dan Fisher, who's going to be speaking next. Todd Lamb. Trying to make this very simple. Nick Cornett. Gary Richardson. Gary Jones. Did I leave anyone out? They're men with shears in their hands. You know, like Donald Trump used to stand up and say, Hillary won't even call it radical Islamic terrorism. Dan Fisher says, these guys won't even call it murder. You know why? You call it murder, you're dealing with the reality of what we saw in the dance. You're dealing with that very sick, sinful, depraved, wicked, and violent thing. And when 1 in 4 women have engaged in this, and whenever women find themselves in unplanned, difficult pregnancies and situations, our culture says, go get an abortion. Very difficult, heavy stuff. But the law, John talked a lot about the law, is meant to be what? A tutor. The law is meant to be a tutor. And we want a guide that doesn't say, yeah, I'm going to trim the branches. We want a guide. We want a leader that actually says, I'm going to pick up this axe and I'm going to lay it to the root. And that's Dan Fisher, guys. The only abolitionist running for governor in the state of Oklahoma. That's it. That's all I got.